Has anybody in this room ever felt a level of frustration with a brand or service provider? A few hands going up, and the rest are obviously still too disgruntled to be able to even be able to lift their hands anymore. Have you, as a customer or a client, ever got to a point with a service provider or a brand where you thought, damn it, I'm going to the social networks? Who here has raised an issue about a service or a, many people in the room, either Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn? Would anybody actually raise customer service queries to LinkedIn? I know that's kind of definition of futility, isn't it? Now, why do we do this? Do we do this because we think this is the first point of call and the best way to get service resolved? Do we do this because we think that we have no other option left because the call centre has left us hanging on for 30 minutes, telling us that the call is really important to them? Do we do this because actually we don't care about the brand or the service provider? What we want to do is to let all of our friends know that they're crap. Or a combination of all those reasons. And the thing is, we do this, and then what happens? There's a chap I know, Ian Cohen. He's a very influential CIO in the UK. He's head of technology for one of the big law firms. And this happened yesterday. He received a tweet from EE. I'm not picking up, is anybody here from EE? I'm not picking on EE particularly. I could have chosen any of the telecoms providers, let's be honest. And he received this, who knew that Quid could pack such a punch? A marketing campaign over Twitter, which led Ian to basically say, all very well, but you better fix your customer service because it's rubbish. And then he got this response from them. I'll leave you for a moment to digest the sheer misery. And this isn't uncommon. This really isn't uncommon at all. So we've got all these channels that we can have to be able to communicate with each other as people. We have all these channels that brands can use to communicate to us as, hopefully, people, although mainly as indivisible units of consumer. And yet when you actually see how these things match together, what happens? You get all of the horrible disconnects that exist within organisations being brought to horrible public view through their sheer horribleness. I think I've used the word horrible 3 times then. That's a new person best. Yeah, exactly. Horrible, horrible, horrible. This is happening in all sorts of places. We need to think about what to do with it. So, quick instructions. Hi, I'm Matt. I am a digital transformation consultant. There's some words that are loosely strung together to possibly mean something. My career background, I've worked in technology roles and in media and marketing organisations and some others over my career. And I guess that the constant theme has been about people and technology and media and content and how those sort of 3 worlds intertwine. As of the beginning of this summer, I started working with the IG group, and we've, over the course of the summer, through the research that I've been doing, which we'll talk about in more detail, established this new proposition called IG Digital, which is partly why we're here today. So that's a bit about me. Twitter handle, there's my email address. And Katie?
Thank you. Morning, everybody. It's great to meet some new people and see quite a few familiar faces in the audience as well. Similar to Matt in terms of the brands I've worked for, the likes of BBC and Visa and Microsoft and many others. But I'm a little bit older than Matt, and I've had some chats with some of you in the room earlier on, and I was a bit of a Luddite about 6-7 years ago. And at the age of 47 now, I've got teenage daughters, and it was beginning to creep over my head. So I can empathise for those of you in the room that are a bit frightened off by it. I mean, it's great that you're here and you're here to learn. But 6 months after going out and getting trained, I was on the other side of the table training Saatchi and Kingfisher and Harrods. I'm the chairperson for my industry group, which is a public relations consultants association. So I train other digital marketing agencies and PR agencies as well. But day to day, I run Zoodikers, which is a PR and social media agency. So it's daily actually implementing this for people, being the sort of angels behind CEOs' Twitter doing strategy work for people. So that's what I do. So I'm doing it every day, so I understand the challenges of managing it, getting it right, building it as part of an integrated strategy. And again, as a mini kind of case study in how it can work, just because you get great profile, just because you stand up at Social Media Week London, the phones don't ring, orders don't come flying in through the door. So you use it as stepping stones to other things. And so for me, tweeting and blogging and posting regularly, sometimes last thing at night, sometimes the minute I turn my phone on in the morning, weekends, helps getting onto the BBC, being a regular commentator, being able to stand up at these events. But it's what you do with it from here that actually matters, and that's very relevant to what we're here to talk about. So I want to start by just setting the landscape before Matt goes into the detail of the findings of this particular piece of research. You know, what the future actually holds, because I just touched upon there, you know, the fact that some people are actually quite fearful of it. We've seen the launch of the Apple Watch. We're seeing all kinds of new trends coming through all the time. I mean, the web is now 25 years old. We're seeing the increase now into the Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything, wearables. We're looking at billions of devices being attached to us, our clothes being able to detect whether or not we need our insulin, you know, links to doctors for chronic patients and so on. So all of this is kind of coming down the line. So if you're a bit scared, as a couple of people I chatted to in here, of Twitter, then guys, you need to go and get trained and feel comfortable with it, and don't think of it as the domain of the 20-somethings, because actually they don't necessarily get your business strategy, they don't necessarily understand marketing. So when you, as an experienced business person, go and get trained and fully understand how to use what are basically simple platforms, you're the ones that will have the power. You know, and this is what we're kind of looking towards, is everything being connected, the connected car of the future, our waste being kind of siphoned through, Google's acquisition of Nest, us being able to control our heating and all those different aspects. So a very tech world that really we've got to come to terms with, or else we're going to be an underclass and, you know, a group of people that really aren't able to interact with local community services and so on. So, you know, just a kind of a thought, we're going to see more robots, we're going to see more, you know, manual labour being overtaken by all different kinds of technology devices and so on. But at the end of the day, what I've just described is the future. It's part of where we are now, but it's also hype. And I think it's important that you realise day to day in your own businesses the relevance that these social media networks can bring to you. And that's one of the key messages. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, we are in this final piece here, which is the age of the customer. A kind of group of people, and we're all part of that are digitally enabled. We have devices at our fingertips. We're able to access, do competitive reviews, do our own market research. The ZMOT, the Zero Moment of Truth work that's been done by Saatchi and others, basically tells us what we already know. We hate being sold to over the phone. We hate being door-stopped. We want to have the power. We want to be in control. So what that means for you as brands is you've lost control. The control is with us, the kind of consumer, because we're the empowered consumers, and you need to be obsessive about us. And Matt's going to talk about how actually in many instances that isn't happening through digital. But that's really what we're looking for. People are looking, you know, to brands to be obsessive about them, to communicate with them, to personalise information for them. And that's kind of what we're facing at the moment. But again, don't think of it as jumping on that bandwagon, that latest new social media platform, whether that's WhatsApp or Tinder or something more relevant to your business like Twitter and LinkedIn perhaps. And don't forget to start with, down here with, you know, what is your business strategy? Short, medium, long term, where are you taking your business? Where does your revenue come from? Where in the future do you anticipate new revenue streams coming from? And that's your destination. And amongst all of that is customer service, the need to have the right culture for customer service, the need to have the social listening tools in place. You know, every day I'm seeing new apps, new tools, dashboards and so on that we can all use to supposedly give us more time and productivity. But it's constant, and it's, I know, you know, many companies are drowning in all of these different platforms and different types of content. But a mix of community management, paid for advertising, especially if you're using Facebook for business to consumer. This is the kind of relevance and the reality of today's social platforms. New platforms will come and go. And so therefore you might question, do I invest in a certain platform because it's not going to have a long shelf life? But actually many of them have been around for quite a long time. And I think the principle of that two-way engagement for free over these global platforms, direct with people you're trying to communicate with, is very powerful, irrespective of whether it's Facebook or others, irrespective of whether it's there in another couple of years' time. So get to grips with that ability to find out, through all the mess of porn stars and students and stuff on Twitter, hone in on your own audience, your own ecosystem of influence, and focus in on the relevance of that for customer service, for marketing, for HR, for all those different business benefits. And what we like to think of it of is a wider set, like a framework and a matrix that starts down here with segmenting your audience down, and you might be looking at that again for doing amazing customer service, for retaining clients. It might be about new business development, looking at it from a sales point of view. It might be about HR, it might be about attracting the right kind of people. And all of this relates to business goals that might be about profit, retention, might be about educating customers about a wider portfolio of services that you actually have. And ultimately it boils down to how do they need to perceive you, and what messages, facts, figures, testimonials, not sales speak, can you put out and engage with them over these social platforms. And really that's the final bit here, is where are they? What do they read? What do they influence? What events do they go to? What LinkedIn groups are they part of? What Facebook groups are they involved in? And that's all virtual, but mix that in with the seminars and the webinars and the coffees and the lunches and the golf days, all of which have real relevance in today's world as well. So I'm going to hand you back. That's the future and a little bit of the now, and then we're back to the present day.
Thank you. So the future, robots, watering plants, hoverboards. Where are the hoverboards? Next year. Okay. And you know, we get caught up in these waves of technology hype. The technology companies perpetuate it, the media perpetuates it, everything is the future, and then you come down to the reality of trying to get in touch with a mobile phone company, and that seems a very long way away from hoverboards. Maybe that's the answer, I don't know. So, what does it look like today? Well, I can't tell you exactly today, but I can tell you what it's been looking like over the course of this summer. At the beginning of the summer, I launched into a research exercise to just get a picture about where the market is today, to where organisations are today, to understand what they're doing, to be able to understand where they see challenges ahead, how well integrated are these different channels that they have open to them. Over the course of the summer, we talked with 65 different organisations. Now, this isn't a representative sample, let me make that clear. This was people who expressed an interest in the subject matter, and that reflects interestingly in the results, as we'll see shortly. And it was also a piece of research where I very intentionally wanted this to be about the qualitative nature of what was going on rather than just the quantitative nature. There's loads and loads of nice infographic blur that goes out onto the internet. I am also guilty of putting some of that stuff out there. But actually being able to understand the narrative, the stories, being able to understand what it is that people are thinking about this stuff in all sorts of organisations, from professional services companies through to education institutions, through to retailers, through to manufacturers of consumer goods, through to publishers and media companies. A really interesting cross-section of organisations, UK-based, that we spoke to. And we also spoke to different people within those organisations. We spoke to marketers, we spoke to people involved in technology, we spoke to customer experience folk, we spoke to general managers. So again, quite a broad spectrum of the people that we were speaking to within all of that. The full details of what we found out, obviously, hopefully you'll have received the link by now. You can look at that at your own leisure, that is the term. But we're going to give you some highlights. Now, as I said, this was a self-selecting group to an extent. These were groups of people. These were people who said, I'm interested in what's going on within customer experience and digital and this world, and the incentive to take part in it was to get a copy of the report early. So that's how, we didn't pay them. For those people in the room who completed the survey, sorry about that, but we've got some biscuits. as a result, probably unsurprisingly, the people that we spoke to within their sector saw themselves predominantly as either ahead of the average in terms of digital adoption within their sector, or average. So this is, as we go in to look at the detail, of people who see themselves as basically at or ahead of the curve in general. Now, there's a couple of things to bear in mind with that. First of all, if you ask people where they are in terms of their performance, let's take, for example, if I were to ask you all how good a driver you are, we will find that most of you who drive will respond that you're probably slightly better than the average driver. Okay, that can't be possible about the maths of it. This is a psychological bias that we have. So that's one element to bear in mind within this. And say also, because of the incentivisation, these are people who see themselves in this sort of space as well. If we break it down by the sectors that we spoke to, technology, media and telecoms were the least future thinking in terms of where they saw themselves. So people who were in technology, media and telco companies overall saw themselves as more average than any of the other sectors that we saw. Now that might be because actually that as a sector is one that's very well advanced. So it's harder to be at the cutting edge if you're competing with people who are right at the bleeding edge. It might be just that they're a bit more insecure. For business services companies, this includes professional services companies, recruitment companies, marketing companies and others. That pretty much matched with the average overall. Financial services, smaller sample, but about average. Education is something we'll come back to in a bit, but education, I think, particularly higher education, is a really interesting sector, because if you think about the demographics of their customer base, and if you think about the fact that they have customer expectation with the introduction of rather substantial fees like they never have in the past, there's some really interesting stuff going on within higher education as a result, because they have to. Anyway, so a little bit of breakdown about where the companies that we spoke to saw themselves in terms of their adoption. Now, where were they in terms of how had they actually adopted services? Now, the dark green, I feel like Peter Snow now, it's great. The dark green is they have that channel, and they regard that as a channel that is fully integrated into the way in which they communicate with their customers. Light green is they have that channel, but we kind of make it up as we go along. Orange is we're thinking about it and we've got some plans in place. And then red is no, we're not going anywhere near that, thank you very much. For the companies we spoke to, email is without doubt the best integrated customer communications channel. The vast majority of those companies, they were doing email well. Next up, telephone. Third, the web, and by the web we meant transactional stuff. And if you think about anything that is transactional on the internet, it is possible to have transactional stuff on your website and it not actually integrate with your processes. But it's increasingly rare these days, because this is a world of pain. Because you basically have emails being sent and then somebody has to then retype that into the sales processing system or whatever. This was the way of the web 10 years ago, but it's kind of... the fourth most integrated customer communications channel for the companies that we spoke to, the 65 companies, was post. And then the rest of it, kind of, sort of, Twitter, sort of, Facebook. Fax still getting a reasonable showing, which is good, 170-year-old technology. Interestingly, text message, SMS messaging, not within the companies that we spoke to. Very rare to see much going on within SMS messaging, but about the same as LinkedIn. LinkedIn, the HR channel. It's the reality of that. Web live chat services, YouTube, Skype, Pinterest. I think the other thing that's interesting there is with having spent a couple of years working at Microsoft and trying to convince organisations about developing apps for the Microsoft platform, if you just look across the board, actually well-integrated apps are still a relatively uncommon thing within the companies that we spoke to. And remember again, these are companies that see themselves as ahead of the curve or average within their sector. So it's still, if you want to communicate effectively with your supplier, maybe email them, pick up the phone, or go to their website. And if all of those fail, send them a letter. Now, why might this be? One of the things that I think is underpinning this is where the ownership of these new channels resides in organisations. Of the companies we spoke to, the biggest owner of digital channels, without question, was the marketing group. Well, that's, that makes sense as an outbound, medium. But it's not just about media. It's not just about sending stuff out to people. It's not just broadcasting. These are networks as much as they are media. And I think that that's part of the disconnect here, that we're introducing things at a stage where it's about attracting new customers, but it's not necessarily about them being able to fulfill once somebody's made the decision to become a customer. And then if you look at where customer experience people map in terms of ownership within organisations, only 6% of the companies, which is that 4 of them that we spoke to, put ownership of digital channels within their customer experience teams. And yet ownership of telephone or ownership of email, and definitely ownership of kind of web chat, stuff like that, that definitely sits within those customer experience teams. So you can see these disconnects happening. There's then a distinction between split ownership and unclear ownership. Split ownership is where there was a really coherent, what we have is ownership of digital channels sits within our marketing team, our customer experience team and our technology team, and we work together to be able to deliver an experience for our customers. 22% of the people we spoke to fell into that category where it felt like they spoke about it in an integrated way. Unclear meant, when I asked the question, so who owns these digital channels? The answer would be something along the lines of, oh, there's a question. And then you get into almost a therapy session. There are some companies that have digital teams with clear digital ownership. Not very many in the UK. The Chief Digital Officer as a concept is starting to get some traction in the UK. I know within central government, it's now pretty much all of the central government teams in UK government have a Chief Digital Officer. But within the companies that we spoke to of very varying sizes as well, fairly uncommon. Customer experience, and then there are, I think, 2 companies where digital was in the hands of their technology teams. Which quite frankly scares the living daylights out of me, but there we go. So there we go. So we have organisations predominantly putting these channels into the hands of marketing, and we have a disconnected experience. What does a properly social business look like?
Coming back to my point earlier about the fear factor, often it's people of a certain age and they tend to be the people managing these organisations. I hear the term pale, male and stale more frequently in that context. And I think part of the problem that Matt's just identified is a lack of understanding at the board level, in the C-suite, in the management, whether it's a small business or a corporation. And the too much emphasis on marketing, because typically it's owned, as we've seen, by the marketing team, on broadcasting and actually selling in a very one-way fashion. Or even if it is two-way, it's actually a facade, and then what happens underneath is you have to go through it, you have to send off the questionnaire, you have to write, you have to kind of then deal with the customer services behind the scenes. And what we try to encourage our clients to do, and what I regularly talk about, is trying to evolve into being a true social business where it isn't siloed, where people communicate, where the board gets it, and the board understands that this business transformation that's happening now isn't going away. Many of them woke up January of this year and realised, guys, Facebook's here to stay, Twitter is, this whole social networking thing is here. So let's get to grips with it. Let's understand its impact in HR. Let's understand how salespeople can be armed with knowledge and be trained on, for example, LinkedIn and Twitter and data mining for conversion of leads. Let's get the customer services team talking to marketing, get them talking to IT, come up with a coherent, clear strategy of how we're going to deal with the customer. Who owns it at the different stages of the process. Because social media is impacting every single department in the organisation, as you can see here. You know, from the CRM and bids to thought leadership, to access, to HR, recruitment, succession planning, all those kinds of things, legal as well, all of them. So, you know, really what we're moving towards is businesses starting to get to grips with it, breaking down the silos, having a clear strategy, and talking to one another. This is echoed the similar statistics. I mentioned I'm involved with the Public Relations Consultants Association. 2 or 3 weeks ago, they announced the latest digital report in association with YouGov, and similar statistics coming through there. The leading motivation for companies to take on social media is for general marketing, for brand awareness, and that's 87%. And falling way behind, dropping down to 51%, is the customer service. It's usage as a customer service platform, which means most people are using it for broadcast, pushing out, push messages, and sometimes that's not always two-way engagement. Sometimes it is, and some brands are doing some good, fun, compelling, great engagement, but maybe they're not doing it well enough with customer service, maybe their sales teams are not using it, and that's my experience as well in working for some of the leading brands.
So, having kind of had these conversations with so many different people, try to pull out of this some sort of nuggets of usefulness rather than just being a mass of data and lots of narrative. You can find more of that detail back in the report, but it strikes me that we see organisations in one of 3 stages when it comes to the adoption of digital channels. The first stage is the chaotic stage. This is where things are springing up uncontrolled anywhere or all over a business. Because remember, the cost of entry for this stuff now, you know, how much does it cost to set up a Twitter page or a Twitter account? Nothing. How much control can you have over somebody within your organisation setting up an organisational Twitter account? None, other than through process and procedure. And so it happens, and you get these sort of emergent bits of digital happening all over places. It's also compounded with the fact now that the way in which technology can be delivered doesn't mean that you have the traditional controls of going through the IT department. Companies like Salesforce have actually majored their marketing around the delight that you can introduce a customer relationship management team without having to involve your IT department, which is a deeply unsettling thing if you work in an IT department. That's a separate story. One of the traditional, I guess, roles that groups within, say, IT had was to be able to act as a block, and whilst that was a pain in the backside for everybody else, it did lead to a level of kind of governance and control in organisations that had some benefits. That's not happening now, so you're getting pockets of digital activity springing up all over the place until you get into the second stage, which is where somebody says, we need to do something about this chaos. And what you then see is a centralisation of activity, usually into the marketing department, where digital becomes owned by one group. Now, that's a really useful stage to go through. All of these have deep, purpose and function behind them. As that sort of consolidation happens, and as the focus becomes around a single group owning digital, the plus side of that is you start to get coherence, and you also start from a customer's perspective to get coherence, because one of the biggest problems for an organisation about the chaotic stage is that every single organisational divide that you have becomes horribly mirrored in what your customers are seeing, because they can see the structure of your company through the Twitter accounts and the Facebook activity and the disjointed customer experience. Centralisation pulls all of that together, but if it's being done by a group that has a particular primary focus, particularly within marketing. It means it tends to again get skewed to the front of the sales pipeline, effectively, to the marketing end of it, rather than to the customer service end. Think back to Ian's experience with EE. It was the marketing campaign that led to his disgruntlement, that led to him getting a response that made him even less happy. Now, ultimately, what sorted Ian out yesterday was a person. A person had the nous to be able to say, I will deal with this, and they dealt with it, and he ended up happy customer. But centralisation is a stage at which you can start to also get the sort of process and procedure. It means that you lose some of the humanity of all of this. Very risky. The final stage is one that I saw maybe in about 20% of the companies that I spoke to, and this is where the centralised role starts to push back out again, because ultimately all of this stuff, whether it's social, whether it's digital channels, whatever you want to call it, it affects every part of an organisation. And so for that to work, you need it to be pushed back out into every single function within an organisation. To an extent, just draw a parallel with the world of IT, we're sort of seeing that in a way in some organisations as well, where IT went through a thing of being totally decentralised, chaotic, servers that would be PCs sitting under people's desks. Some of you in the room are old enough to remember that kind of world, some of you won't be, and you're wondering what the hell I'm talking about. And then it got to a point where IT departments centralised all that activity, economies of scale, and then it started to get broken because it wasn't delivering a service that was actually necessarily the thing that the businesses actually needed. But with a combination of the new models of technology delivery, it's now being decentralised back out again. In terms of what this means for digital, I think a couple of really interesting examples of it. The first was with a major credit card company that I spoke to. Now, they have got to a stage where I think they really have decentralised what they're doing with digital, because they're developing new product propositions by bringing together multidisciplinary teams. It's not something being led out of digital or marketing, it's being led out of product development, and they bring together marketers, product developers, technologists, digital marketers, customer service people into coherent teams who then develop these new customer propositions and take them to market. A completely different scale, another really interesting example came from a higher education institution. And this was actually a conversation with their IT head, who's a very enlightened chap. And he basically said, look, for us, when it comes to the students, how they want to interact with us as an institution should be irrelevant in terms of what channel they want to use. If they want to tweet us, if they want to email us, if they want to come in face to face, or if they want to send us something on Facebook, or if they want to use WhatsApp or whatever else, it should be fairly irrelevant. We just want to have communication with them, but also they want to communicate with each other. And he'd observed this fantastic thing where undergraduates, starting with their first term in the September, October, were self-organising Facebook groups to be able to help them through those first few months of landing at university and wondering what the hell was going on, to be able to answer each other's questions. And then by sort of December, those groups had become defunct again, because everybody knew what it was they were doing and had worked out what the files were. Whatever it is that students do these days. He didn't have any sense of wanting to control that. All he wanted to see was that they could feed those networks, because actually it was serving all the purposes they wanted in a totally decentralised way. I found that fascinating, that this was about higher education institutions traditionally been quite controlling, from my experience, in how they want communications to happen. They were completely giving this up to their customers. Self-organisation. So, chaotic, centralised, and then this sort of nirvana state of decentralised, although of course there'll be something coming along after that as well. Something else that we asked all the people that I spoke to over the summer was, who do you look to? Who are the exemplars of great digital customer engagement? And the first thing that really surprised me on that was how many people really couldn't answer the question. They really struggled to think of anybody, which is telling. Remember, these people are people who regard themselves as reasonably advanced in this stuff, or at least average within their sector. And yet they couldn't really think, many of them couldn't think of anybody particularly who sprung to mind. Pushed them a bit and we started to get some names coming out. a lot of people would only really talk about people in their own sector. There's a full list at the back of the report of every single company and organisation that got mentioned. But there were 3 companies that got mentioned more than 2 times. That's all it took to get onto this list of exemplars of great digital customer experience. The first, and by a long way out in front, was Apple. Apple's interesting because actually, if you think about their use of, say, social channels, they don't really. They do have great integration between a digital experience online and being able to go in and see one of the Apple gurus in store to be able to get your iPod or iPhone or whatever fixed. And so there's an interesting set of things there. But people almost, it seems, hold out Apple as a great example of digital customer experience because they own so many of the customers these days. The second example that came out, and this was mentioned a handful of times, was Amazon. And again, in terms of their web and the fact that it is a purely digital experience and the customer engagement and whatever there, again, really, you can see that. Again, though, in terms of using digital, in terms of social channels, Amazon are sort of playing around with it a bit, but they're quite a walled garden. They'd rather you just worked in Amazon world. The final example that got mentioned, I think 4 times, was O2. And of all of those, I think O2 is the one that, for me, personal judgment on this, but was the one that felt like it most matched with what I thought as being an organisation that did great customer engagement. I'm not an Apple customer, I am an Amazon customer. O2, I'm actually a gift-gap customer, so I experienced through their zero customer service channel, which is a great, liberating and very cheap experience. Cheap in a good way. That was it though. 65 people, over 100 companies mentioned, only 3 of them got mentioned more than twice. And it was those 3. The final then set of questions that we asked people were, what's keeping you awake at night? What are the things over the next 18 to 24 months that are going to be barriers to you providing better digital experience, digital engagement with your customers? And we lump these together into various categories. The biggest, by far, was business change. How do we change our business to be able to meet what we need to do? And a lot of this focused around the word silo. How do we overcome the silos that exist within our organisations that make engaging with our customers so challenging? Those problems have been around for years, but they're becoming really amplified because of the visibility that we have into organisations now because of all these channels available to us. The second category, how do we keep up to our customers' expectations? And in a way, there's elements of this that I think become self-fulfilling prophecies of pain in the bum. It's a weird phrase, but work with me. Within that, so tomorrow I'm doing another presentation. I'm doing a presentation with the marketer about personalisation in marketing. If you signed up for it, you're going to see very much similar slides to this, but with a different spin. But one of the interesting things about personalisation, there's a lot of focus around digital marketing and social marketing that talks about personalising to the needs of the customer. But if you're only doing that up until the point at which they become a customer and then you put them into the homogenised EE type experience, your customer expectations are going to be even worse mismatched than they were before because you've led them to believe that you can pinpoint to the level of precision and accuracy where you even know their dog's cat's name. And yet when they become a real customer, you treat them like again. Third element, the evolution of technology. How do we keep up to date with all of this stuff that's going on when a new social network is launched every 5 minutes and we don't know what the kids are doing and what is Pinterest and Tinder and WhatsApp and how do we keep ahead of this all? Talk to people like us, obviously. But and then the next one is legacy technology. How do we enable services digitally when the back office stuff is back with the ARC? And that was something particular that came across in public sector, and I spoke to a couple of local authorities, And there's big issues there where they've got some really big, clunky old systems, and they've got an incredible pressure to digitally enable a lot of their services, partly to provide a better service and partly to reduce cost. And there's a huge mismatch going on within the public sector as a result of that, certainly local authorities. How to deal with multiple channels, what is omnichannel? Anybody who thinks they know the definition of omnichannel is lying. The competitive environment, what are our competitors doing and how do we push forward against those people? I mean, mostly, it has to be said, pretty conventional business challenges. Again, there's nothing new there, but maybe the pace of change is upped, and also maybe the need to be able to be more cohesive as an organisation is up because of the fact that this makes you much more transparent as an organisation. So, what have we learned from all of this? Well, we thought we'd just sort of distill down into 4 key themes for you, and then, as I say, you can get more detail within the report itself. The first key theme that I'd say, take away with you is these 3 stages. Where is your organisation today in terms of its adoption of digital and social channels for the whole experience rather than just from a marketing side? Are you at the chaotic stage? Are you pre-chaotic? Some organisations really haven't done it yet at all, but that's increasingly rare now. Are you at the chaotic stage where it's springing up all over the place and nobody knows what's going on? Are you at the stage where you've centralised? And if you are, how do you then think about pushing some of that function back over time, back into your organisation? Are you at that final stage where your organisation is living and breathing this throughout? And the second point from me is, this has been a bit of a guiding principle for me over the last 12 months. When you talk to people in marketing about social in particular, they talk about social media. When I think about social networks. And it's a very small semantic difference, but I think actually illustrates some of the challenge. A network is something which is participatory, and it's something which is two-way, and it's something that is I'm a part of. Media is something that happens to me as a customer. And a lot of the models that are being adopted by organisations through using social and digital channels as a marketing model basically end up being cheap mass media. I remember seeing this in actually Social Media Week last year. There was a presentation about the creative use of social channels to be able to develop incredible new communications engagements. And I was really excited about this, and I went along, and basically most of the presentation was how many hits the Felix Baumgartner jumping out of a thing from very high up into space, how many hits it got on YouTube. Oh, it's 16 million views. And I just thought, that's not innovative. That's just cheap advertising. Well, expensive advertising, but you get my idea. It's just an old advertising model. If you're thinking about media, you'll be thinking in those old models. If you think about networks, it starts to open up how you can think about these things differently.
That's spot on, Matt, because that links back to my point about relevance. And I think what you have to find, particularly if your biggest challenge is change, transformation, is how is this changing people that I sell to, so that I can continue to sell to them and sell more to them, the other people that you're reaching out to from a business development point of view. So I think that's absolutely spot on. The third one, and this came through in the research, is that too many of the companies interviewed were blinkers and limiting themselves to their own particular vertical sector. And it's very easy to get caught up. We work across facilities management, pharma, legal, tech, and more often than not, people network in their sector, they read their own sector journals, they're busy in their own sort of day life with their kind of food chain of clients and prospects and so on. And sometimes, particularly in a world like this, which is changing by the minute, you have to step outside of that and look at other sectors. And especially if you are selling to companies across multiple sectors. So look at what's happening in the retail environment, look at what's happening in telecoms, and learn from other people that are perhaps trying to sell to the prospects that you're trying to sell to. How do they network? What kind of events are they involved in? What webinars are they running? What do they tweet about? What LinkedIn groups are they involved in? Which brings me on to that final point. And I've just sort of painted a picture there of the integrated way in which you need to do business. And as I started with at the very beginning, the phones don't ring, the emails don't come through, the orders don't come through. just because you've got thousands of likes on a Facebook page, or your clout score's really high, or you've got, thousands of Twitter followers. It doesn't work like that, which is why it's such a failing that it is purely owned by marketing and that they are so siloed and not communicating with everybody else. I work with some very sophisticated organisations who have their social and their marketing, and it's really compelling content, but their salespeople haven't even been trained in how to use these social networks in order to improve their chances of a great tender that's coming up, to data mine, to get feedback, to think about their pricing. So it's a mix of points really there. It's about use these social networks for more than just broadcasting. Use it for big data. That term hasn't come up yet, but use it for data that's inbound, outbound, and it's relevant to HR, sales, and so on. But also don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Things still work. People still come to seminars. People still have golf days, corporate hospitality, coffees with prospects. They go to all kinds of events. And then hopefully people take advantage. Like we speak to 40, 50 of you here today. You use the hashtag, Santiago films it, it goes up on YouTube, it gets posted. So we might speak to 40 of you and then it might reach 10,000 through the various networks. But the fact that you're here today, these channels are still really important. People still need to build trust, build relationships. And so overlay all of this social networking onto the traditional kind of networking that still is very, very important and very relevant. And one final point within that, which is a bit of a bugbear of mine, which is social media or social networking, as Matt rightly says, is always under the microscope in terms of it delivering a return on investment. That return on investment might not come for 18 months. And so, for example, we've helped clients list on the stock exchange and go digital over a period of a year and blog and raise their thought leadership and then achieve an IPO. With other companies, it might be about international expansion. It might be about kind of longer term business goals that aren't about, oh, what are you going to do for me? How many followers are you going to get from me by Christmas? Who cares? Build an ecosystem of relevant prospects, customers, potential staff you want to hire, companies you want to partner with. That's more important, and you'll achieve that by a mix of different integrated, virtual, traditional, digital ways of doing business. The fact is, digital is so much easier to measure than what I've done for many, many years, which is public relations and other kinds of marketing, which are much harder. So mix that in, but also question the other things. Put the same spotlight on exhibiting and going to sponsorship deals and so on. Question those, put those under the same spotlight. Because what I hear too often is people saying, I haven't got the time and I haven't got the budget. Well, if your prospects and customers are on these social networks, you have to make time. And maybe you'll find the money by not doing some of the things that you've always done, because you're going to put that under the microscope and under the same kind of referencing of whether it's going to deliver ROI. So they're the four kind of takeaways we'd like to leave you with. And really it's just to say I hope it's been useful. It's nice to actually see some research and some facts and figures, because really what's happening now in the digital world is, who do we know who to believe? Everyone is self-publicising through their own blogs, their own Twitter, their own posts. So it's nice to actually ground something in some research for a change. But we'd be really interested in you sharing your experiences through the blogs that we write, through the Twitter feed and so on. But hopefully it's given you something to think about, something to question, and hopefully something to tweet and post about as well. And with that in mind, does anybody have any questions for Matt or from myself? Anybody got contrary views to what you've heard this morning? Or yeah, go back.
I just had a question to gather your opinions really on sort of noise and saturation. Just one aspect of it. We picked up, or probably to the audience or the survey people were. I was just interested to understand how that ties into your sort of use of social network rather than social media, and how you see that.
I mean, for me, the noise issue. How do you know what to look at if you're being bombarded with information all the time? You turn to trusted sources. And that's where actually building relationships, whether that's one-to-one relationships in business-to-business world, or whether it's something more than just, a generic email account or a generic Twitter account that you'll see with big organisations. If you've got a relationship, then people will hear. If you don't have a relationship, then it is just all noise going out, would be my take.
I think I answered that to an extent, because I was talking about making it very relevant, because there are so many platforms that for many of you, you know, the Pinterests and the Flickrs and the Tinders and the WhatsApps and Snapchats that are all noise. They're for different audiences, and if you're looking at it from especially a business-to-business perspective in, say, financial services or legal, all of that stuff is noise, and you have to hone in on where are my clients and prospects and staff that I want to hire and partners, and what are they influenced by? And then the rest is noise, and then you hone in and you make it very relevant, and you go and you use a bit of the noise that's being created, let's say in a LinkedIn group, and you get your customer research done and you find out what the hot buttons are and the issues, and then you relate in a marketing way, not in a sales way, your message and package it up in a relevant way. So your content might be 80% vanilla, and you might top and tail that and make it very, very relevant to telecoms or to legal, and package it up as something much more relevant.
One of the things, when I was working at Microsoft, I was in the evangelism team there, which is another one of my ridiculous job titles. But one of the things we did there, it was an interesting period running up to the launch of Windows 8, when I had a team of 8 evangelists, and I was being told very strictly from corporate centre that if they spoke about anything to do with Windows 8, they'd be fired, which was an interesting dilemma to find them in. One of the things we did over that period, though, with one guy in particular, we looked at the technology landscape. What we needed to do was to be able to reach certain sorts of technology, software developers, and we identified a particular niche in the market around a technology, HTML5, and then there was a gap because lots of people were talking about the futures, but there wasn't anybody really talking with any credibility about how you would use this technology today, about 2 or 3 years ago. And so we very purposefully built up one of the evangelists' persona, basically, around that particular subject area. So we identified where there was a gap in the noise, and then this was building up somebody who had thousands and thousands of people following him. And it was also going into an area which wasn't traditionally Microsoft's domain around open source and open standards. And we found that worked quite well. So there's a counter approach to it is if you can spot where there are areas of discussion that aren't happening, and it feels like there's a credible gap in that space to build up individuals, and it was Martin that we built up, it wasn't Microsoft that we built up in that. And so an individual to be able to build up relationships. And it ends up, at the start of that process, to be able to appear at any event we'd had to pay. By the end of that process, Martin was getting invited to be able to speak at events for free, which is, when you're a company the size of Microsoft, that's a really significant change. And it all was down to the fact that we built up his credibility with him by getting that gap.
Which is public relations. That's what we do. So that's why I'm so heavily involved in this from a kind of digital sector, because it is about thought leadership. You kind of break through. Well, how do I know who to believe? I believe that company because they were just covered in the Law Society Gazette, or that company, that person there, me. Why do we get invited to speak at something like this? Because you're the person that maybe speaks on BBC South East Today regularly, or you're the person that is quoted there, or Matt's kind of in CIO magazine. So it's that kind of credibility and thought leadership that you try to use to break through all of the other millions of people, some of them charlatans, that are trying to kind of skew the pitch with their sales message.
Any other questions? Oh.
In your work and your research, have you found at all, because in my experience, whether they're journalists, marketers, PR, salespeople, everyone now is spoon-fed, absolutely spoon-fed materials, spoon-fed processes to achieve a short-term goal. The ability you mentioned about to network is to think also medium-term, and to think on your feet, not be spoon-fed by a course of anyone doing that well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the education example, where they pushed it completely out to their customers, and if you actually look, I mentioned GiftGaff earlier, they weren't one of the companies that I spoke to as part of this exercise, but I know that GiftGaff are really interesting because they get quoted as being a kind of exemplar of really interesting disruptive use of digital, because what they've done is that they've pushed all of their community to their customers, more or less. They feed it and they curate it a bit and they just keep it in the right direction. But if you have a problem as a gift-gab customer with your gift-gab service, you're probably going to the forums going to get answered by another customer more than you are by somebody who's from customer service. That, for me, is a very extreme example through. I think one of the things that I see within this of as kind of an underlying theme is there's definitely issues around trust and control, which is that traditionally organisations have seen. Okay, the way I put this is traditionally, if you join a company, you become their mouthpiece. And actually, we're entering into a world now where if you join a company, your voice becomes part of the collective voice of that organisation. I think most organisations are still trapped in that old way of thinking, which is we can control all messaging. And that's really dangerous, because in a world where you can't control messaging, if you're working all your processes and principles based on control, all hell breaks loose. That, I think, it's not a technology question, it's a much bigger cultural question for organisations, as they have to confront, actually, we don't run this in the way in which we used to. And, dare I say, the PR industry, for example, is going through that kind of existential crisis at the moment, because part of it is saying, here is this new opportunity and here we can build new ways of communicating, and then the traditional parts of it are going, don't do it. I saw literally a presentation from a PR company this time last year where the main message was, don't do it. That's all they said. They brought somebody from the BBC along to say, don't do it as well. That's the root of this, I think.
It's identity crises as well, isn't it? Because it's the blurring of the lines of the personal usage and the business usage. And PR people are saying don't do it, but actually they're saying get trained and then do it. Because if people are just going into it without any real structure and real knowledge of the consequences, then yeah, prosecution's happening. If you're grossly offensive, you can. So you can see why to an extent people are, but I think it's down to personal branding and building personal advocates and so on. But I think people have got very safe. I think your point is right. I think there is a lot of spoon feeding. And most of what you see on Twitter, 75-80%, are all the marketeers talking to one another, and it's all very safe, and they're all looking to get their own scores up and help one another. And I've heard some horrible phrases, I better not use it. I nearly did then. But there's that kind of massaging of one another's ego. So I think there's quite a bit of that going on. And that is a bit of PR people trying to control it. But let's let the customer service team and the sales teams and the HR teams break through, push marketing a little bit to the side, and have a real voice out there. That's sort of what we're actually saying, is that break those silos down. It shouldn't just sit in marketing. It isn't about outbound, pushing sales messages. It should be real. One of the things that's been identified for a good couple of years is, again, because of transparency and your ability as consumers to research, you have to be really authentic as a brand. People will not be bamboozled by sales messages anymore. So you do have to be authentic. Therefore, you've got to let the other teams kind of shine through and do what they need to do and get what they need and play their role. But it's no longer the control of the brand. It's the mixed way of dealing with your suppliers, your potential staff, your staff. And that's hard. That's massively difficult for top people at the top of organisations who don't understand it, maybe are not yet investing in the right training to understand it, and who have perhaps not got that trust and culture, social culture in the organisation to permeate down. It's massive change for them.
It's interesting cultural things that we found, for example, for CIO, we formed a corporate CIOs to handle the own one up under all those with politics or which are those down to like day up and go on that. It's the cult of personality. Now everyone's following the evidence individually. Another example is the technology in charge who last year sacked entire sales, marketing, PR team, and gave certain
And it's also,
Real.
you know, we all sell. We all have to sell. We might not get a bonus and a commission, and we might not all be quite as slimy as some, but we all have to. Because whether it's selling an idea, whether it's selling a concept, whether it's selling a product, whether it's just being able to get your job done internally within an organisation, you've got to be able to sell. So there isn't any monopoly on it anymore. And as you start to see people thinking very differently about how they might interact with their customers, because these channels give that potential.
So, actually on that point, is part of the problem maybe culturally in businesses? We're all too quick to outsource creativity and voice to agencies. Probably, got to be careful of the crowd. So I've worked with two big corporations in the consumer electronics world, and literally, as soon as social media is raised, the first question is, which agency should we use? And you've got people that know the products, know the services better than anyone you could ever hire externally. Same with creativity in terms of with social campaigns or engagement strategies. It's always about, you have to outsource it, you have to find somebody. In my experience, sometimes you get regurgitated campaigns, you get the same kind of idea that you've seen somebody else do, just a slight variation, rebranding. I was wondering if we get to the stage where people are realising actually we need to, they say, turn this inwards a bit. Get the rock stars and start open the call to actually start.
I think the challenge within that is to go client side, will there be enough interest and intrigue and variation for creative people to work with just a single client in that closed environment? Now, that might be a perception things. I know, from my experience of working in agencies over the years, and with agencies over the years, actually people tend to get pigeonholed with a single client anyway. But there's that thing about, would I identify myself as being a true creative marketer if I was working client side? And maybe that is as much of the problem there as the, where should it sit?
I don't think there's one right answer, and I am biased because I run an agency, but I have been client side, and I've worked with clients where we've worked with them, say, for sometimes 6 months or a year, and in that time we're training them, showing them, and they've grown their team from 1 to 9, and then we've helped them basically in-source it. And I think it's that you outsource something you don't have the core skills for in-house. If you can find them, and let's say you hire an agency person and all of a sudden that person wants a different mix and a different kind of role, that person could be just as good as an agency side person. So I don't think there's kind of one right answer for that.
I think that's the stage that doesn't, in my experience anyway, happen or isn't happening quick enough. Also, I see Facebook feeds and Twitter feeds, I'm looking and thinking that the person knows nothing about, it's not about the brand. There are people within most big organisations that have been there long enough or understand it, or in some cases live and breathe the brand. They're really interested, they just never get a voice.
But it does depend, because we've worked with clients where we've been behind a CEO's Twitter and we've had much more access to the board, and particularly that CEO, and have kind of spent time with him or her, identifying the strategy and carving that all right and getting the facts and figures and working with CSR and so on, and have ended up therefore being better placed than some of the in-house team. So again, it just depends on the quality of the organisation, their ability to get under the skin of a company and its products and so on. But we're talking as if it is all about knowledge of that company and its products, therefore the ability to sell. It's not. It's about knowledge of the market that you're selling to, and the hot buttons that that organisation faces and the solution that you have to their problem, and you have to package it that way, or else you end up standing up and preaching and trying to sell in a world that is not about that.
I think just a final thing on that is that if you look at the other end of the customer journey, actually it's still fairly common to find that customer service is a totally outsourced function as well. And so a contact centre will be a service that's provided by a third party. That's the time when they're actually getting people talking to their customers directly, and they've outsourced.
But more effort seems to be made in customer service, because I'm working in customer service.
Okay.
So more effort seems to be made to integrate and get people, understanding. So recruitment's done on people that are interested in the sector. Recruitment, generally get people, you get a more believable, not all the time, it's not generally, if you look at, if you go to events, so I used to look after communities and super users and stuff, it was, if everybody got an agency and they would spot it straight away. Literally, they can spot, just as they can spot moderators online, people just don't seem to get the tone or the thing, whereas in customer service, just because of osmosis almost, because you're on it every day,
absolutely.
you start to absorb the product knowledge, you start to absorb the brand. And I think so maybe that's certainly the bit we're struggling with at the moment.
That's a good point. Sorry, there's another question at the back.
Yeah, you know, it's actually pretty much following. I'm also from a customer service background, and it brings us back on the slides that you had earlier, is that whilst obviously we spend on marketing in terms of customer service, one towards the other, but the merging of the lines where obviously a lot of these customer conversations are public, to raise the awareness and the available budgets in terms of customer service. Now, working for a large outsourcing business, I've got other people, customer service, and European social community. Now, I'm actually looking at us, so we've just rolled out a new European sales team. Myself and the manager and a couple of people in Spain are trying to transform the company to this is how we should do it today. This is how the old Uber generation used to sell. This is the new technology. This is where we need to be, so on and so forth. And we're at the point now where we are trying to get the other core business functions to adopt our brand sentiment, our culture, and to start taking those messages out. Now the trouble is, there's a big risk for us at the minute, because time and time again, when we take off that approval step, we start seeing stuff being tweeted wrong, or with typos, or just things that a marketing person or a salesperson, or even a good customer service person would pick up. When the HR person is putting out a recruitment message, they do something wrong and it goes out, you know, that is potentially brand damage.
It is, yeah.
So when you go, okay, we want to try and go completely decentralised, how do you retain that control to have those checks and balances? Because where we are currently is we have each component department has access to the channels that they should, and it all goes through to an approval step. So every single post at the minute still needs to be approved by our brand manager, and that's as close as we've got to being able to give them carte blanche. So, and I don't see it being able to go any further at this time.
The question for me on that is, what are the services that could be provided centrally that are supporting the activity on a decentralised basis? So is it actually also the language around it, is it, are they regarded as the brand police, or are they the people who make sure that the copy is good? Is it a proofing service rather than a editorial control service? I mean, it's the same thing, but can you position it in a way that it feels that it's more empowering to the people rather than something that's controlling them? Those would be the things that I'd be looking at to be able to move that forward.
And
but you're right, it's not about completely throwing it out to chaos again.
But it does boil down to the right people in those positions being educated, having the right training and knowing how to use it, having clear roles and responsibilities, and having a policy in place that effectively makes it serious enough that if there are problems, that's policed and that's actually taken further. Because you're at that cutting edge of brand reputation, and when things go wrong, you can't afford it to go wrong.
This is a service we provide by an agency.
Yeah.
We had one of our, this is very embarrassing, but we had one of our MIS guys come back and go, yeah, I'm not sure posting a link to Google's homepage, that's much value. And it says, because it's got flags, we've got notification labels. It's been up like 20 minutes and come back. I to our director, what they've done is they've got an admin account, because the only person who can actually bypass the approval step. So obviously go to post something, you've had it wrong, we just press enter and send the link out to Google. Because then we picked up and we sent an email around, we don't mind who it was, we're just trying to understand, make sure I can't something that, where did this come from? And like everyone goes, wasn't it, apart from one person, go, well, clearly you then.
But if people are being given the free, if people join an organisation, you can't stop them tweeting, in their own personal capacities. But if they start tweeting on behalf of the organisation, then A, they should have approval, and B, they should be properly educated to know how to use them properly and the kind of content that is allowed. Because going back a few years, you'd have the approved spokespeople who would have gone through broadcast media training, and they would be managed by the PR teams in-house or in an agency. And now it's like a free-for-all. And I'm shocked when I've trained groups of salespeople and all kinds of executives at all levels in an organisation, and they go away from the training course, they all get on their Blackberries and their iPhones, set up their Twitter feeds and start tweeting about the company. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. I mean, if we're on board and we're working for them ongoing, then we're talking to them about social policy and all of this and HR, and it's integrated in with legal and so on. But when it's just a training course, you know, and it's down to kind of like that internal in-house team to manage that, I'm shocked at the freedom that many organisations give to people who are new to these social platforms and the potential damage that they could do. It's frightening. Yes.
The survey was the UK survey.
Yeah.
Brands you mentioned were maybe global ones, except with higher education bodies. Is there anything you sense would be different if we've got an international lens on this emerging market? These trends you're talking about.
Okay, so just in terms of the first point, that the three brands that got mentioned more than twice were international brands, but actually the bulk of the ones that got mentioned, you'll see in the full report, are actually mostly UK-based companies. So it was just about the ones that got the frequency of mention. I think in terms of emerging markets, the thing that I don't know, but what I'd be looking at is around the difference in terms of mobile take-up and how that's impacting the way in which people are starting to use services. Because you've got, in many cases, in countries where they've bypassed the kind of PC stage, and if you think about how we're at this weird transition phase at the moment where we have our laptops and we have our mobiles and we have our tablets and we use them in very different ways, and certainly for me, I started to find that my phone is my primary device now, but I use it in a very different way to the way in which I use a laptop. And I don't know, but if you have countries where the culture of digital is mobile first, I think that will lead to different sorts of interactions. It's a much more personal thing. You know, email is a very impersonal. It's a service that we've used to be able to issue automated messages that start with "do not reply." I don't think you can get less personal than something that says "don't reply." You don't see that within the mobile-centric services, and I wonder whether that will mean that it's a more personal. I don't know, but
the coping with the sheer volume and the business transformation, I'd say, is very, very similar. But I think Matt's right, the kind of devices and platforms, you know, it still boils down to relevance though, doesn't it? It's still going to have the same challenges of, do I literally go onto these platforms and jump on that bandwagon and be very active? Actually, no, let's question where, you know, you've still got all the similar sorts of questions, I think, and transformation to cope with. Yes.
So a question, just following on about customer care agency side of things, how do you feel that technology vendors help with enterprise holistic social media approaches? And I'm not talking about your Hootsuite scheduling, posting, etc. I'm talking more about workflows, customer care, social inboxes, content sharing, app creation, so you don't need a creative agency. Does it a threat to your business? And how do you feel they assist or possibly hold back development of this approach of this social planning?
So my own personal view on this is that the kind of customer contact technology world is one of the most systemised, process-centric technology markets that I know of that involves people. It's factory machine line process, very deterministic, incredibly metric driven. It's something I wrote about for CIO magazine a few months ago, that what it seems to me is that the discussion within the customer experience world is, how do we integrate social channels into our processes? My question is, why are the processes that you're delivering customer service by so awful that people will find any route to bypass them? And I think that there's a fundamental challenge that we have about expectation and, say for example, in a lot of customer contact environments, telephone is primary because if somebody's phoning you, you can't delay it until later. You can try, you can let them to leave a message, but you don't particularly. And so telephone takes priority over everything else. So the way it works is, if you're not busy, people who aren't busy answer email or answer Twitter or whatever else, And then when it gets busy, all hands onto the telephones, often is the way it works. Which means that even more backlog of disgruntled customers who are finding other channels to be able to try to get in touch are building up because nobody's answering anything but the telephones. And these new social channels just seem to be within the technology setup, just asynchronous communications that can be dealt with later. Now, there's a core question within that. If I tweet a company, how quickly am I expecting them to answer me? Now, if we go right back to the beginning of this, if I tweet a company, it's because I'm pissed off. And so I don't expect it to take a day for them to get back to me. But that's often going to be the case.
Well, I guess most of these providers are now putting in SLAs around the customer service and response times. And yes, it's automated, so there's always going to be margins of error. But I think I disagree with you to a certain extent there in the fact that the opportunities technology provides is the opportunity to hyper-personalise it, to be able to get this tweet into your customer service centre and say, okay, this person, I can see because we've integrated it with our CRM that they're a high-value customer, this is the interaction history we've had with them in the past, this is their influence level. So my prioritisation of this response, the content of this response is going to be very much more tailored to this person as opposed to a generic message like we saw from the e-response there, which you're not going to get on the phone.
When that works well, I completely agree with you, and it happened to me with Virgin. So I got that instant response, it was personalised and it was fantastic, and it appeased me at the point where I was really angry. But then where it fell down, which I think is what the survey's saying, then I had to fill in the written questionnaire, and then I actually waited 3 months and got quite a lot of money in terms of vouchers, and I won't go into bore you with the details of it, but that worked, and that automation and then the customer service at the kind of Twitter phase actually worked. But where it fell down was that was siloed, and it wasn't kind of communicating really, it could have kind of sent me that questionnaire, I had to go and get one, it could have kind of followed it all the way through the process and kept me communicated with along the way, and it should have been speeded up, it shouldn't have taken months to actually follow through. So I think, where technology can be used to facilitate that and to kind of make it part of a kind of a more integrated customer-centric service with personalisation, face-to-face, phone and so on, then that's a good mix.
And that can be a differentiator. So some companies set themselves out, if you look at the way in which they first direct, answer with a person, usually within 2 rings. And they use that as a differentiator with other services. I think the thing that gets me about this, and I think increasingly becomes very disingenuous, is where there's the mantra of customers are at the heart of everything we do, your call is very important to us, but we're experiencing unprecedentedly high call volumes at the moment. And you just know customer care is a cost that you're trying to control. And that's fine because that's getting passed on to me as a consumer, but don't lie. And it's that bit that this increasing transparency, I think, is going to push.
I think to add to that, as well as to your point, that's always been the dream, though, to have that integrated set of contacts coming into the same place, so that if I phone up my organisation and we go back 10 years and I've sent a text in, you should know that I've sent that, so you answer my call differently. But it's still not there. And I think that there's a lot of it to do, and until you have integrated customer inbound channels, whether it's a kind of call routing engine that picks up all the other bits and pieces and routes them through to someone, there's too much of a disconnect between all these technologies at the moment. And I don't know whether it's going to get harder or easier. So that's not sitting on the fence now on that question. But there's a lot of questions still to be answered that have not been answered for nearly 20 years.
I'm just conscious of time, we're running over quite a bit, so I think we'll kind of close it there. We're here for a bit, so if anybody wants to come on up afterwards and continue the discussion. But on behalf of Matt and myself, thank you very, very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of Social Media Week London, and keep in touch. Look forward to your tweets. Thank you.